Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Frank Learning Center at the American Jewish University. My name is Rotem Rosenthal, and I'm the chief curator of AJU. And the symposium also marks the opening of a project titled Launch Sites LA. Launch Sites LA, and you'll hear a lot about this project today. Launch Sites LA is actually the second chapter in a series of exhibitions called Chapters in Israeli Art. This year, the AJU celebrates its 70th anniversary, and another place celebrates its 70th birthday, which is Israel. I don't know if you know that. And we're also marking the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which is considered to be a milestone in the history of Zionism and the Jewish settlement in Palestine and later in Israel. And this series of exhibitions tries to think about the legacy of those events by looking at contemporary perspectives and some untold stories. So this exhibition really thinks about the untold stories and the way that we can revisit them. The exhibition is divided into two projects. One project is shown upstairs, and after the symposium will conclude, we'll go up there and have some wine, because that's what you want to do after a symposium, and we'll celebrate the opening reception of Ezra Orion Revisited, which is an exhibition that started in Israel in the Center for Digital Art, and I'll go back to that soon. Our other project is a site-specific project shown at the House of the Book at our other campus at Brandeis Bardeen, and you'll hear more about that project as well today. So what we're doing here today is basically thinking about these projects and also trying to look at ways where Ezra Orion's work is crucial to the history of art in Israel, but also the ways it intersects with the history of art here in Southern California. Ezra Orion was a sculptor, poet, and thinker who passed away in 2015. And the exhibition we're showing upstairs is based on selected parts of his archive. And the exhibition we're showing at the House of the Book has a site-specific project by LA-based artist Dan Levinson, who's here with us today, and he's going to be talking about that project later on. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to hear a lot of words today, so I think we should probably just get started. I'm going to be in conversation with my co-curator, Udi Edelman, who's the curator of the Center for Digital Art in Holon in Israel, and he is also the director of the Institute for Public Presence, which is a project he will tell us about shortly. We will then hear from Joanna Fiducia, who is an assistant professor at Reed College in Portland, Oregon. So she has joined us all the way from Portland, which is really cool. And then we're going to hear from Dan Levinson, who will be in conversation with Anthony Salvador and Daniel Spalding. And I'll announce what we're doing every part, so we don't have to remember everything right now. I want to thank the American Jewish University for their support of this program. Artis, or Art Is, the way it is, I think, more well known in the US, which is the organization that supported this exhibition, and through its programs and grants supports the presentation of Israeli art in the United States. I would like to thank Rabbi Gary Oren, who's the Dean of the Wizen Center, and Dr. Robert Wexler, the president of the university, for their support of this project. I want to thank all the speakers that joined us today. I want to thank you for being here. And I want to thank Gina Brown, the Arts Program Associate, without whom a lot of the things that are going to happen today would probably not happen the same way. So that's it. I think that's enough thank yous. If you need caffeine, please don't hesitate. We have plenty of it, along with some sugar, over at the entrance, which might be needed at some point of the day. And that's it. Thank you for joining us today. And now I'm going to do a smooth transition into the hot seat. It's like a TV show, so I just ended this part and now I'm like switching to the other set.
Let's cook something.
Let's cook something. You know, that's actually what the kids are doing today at the other end of the library. There's a culinary class for kids happening art and food is always a good combination. So what I want to do now is share just a little bit about how I came across this project and why is it here in LA. So I had the good fortune of seeing the first iteration of the Ezra Orion exhibition when it was shown at Udi's space in Hulon. And I actually thought it was one of the best exhibitions that I've seen in recent years. And my next thought was, why didn't I know more about this artist? You know, as soon as Udi told me about this project, I was mind blown. And then I realized that's the reaction of a lot of my colleagues, a lot of other curators and artists and scholars in Israel. Every time you say the name Ezra Orion to someone, they're like, oh, that sounds familiar, but no one was really sure about what he did. And that's a shame, because Ezra Orion was one of those rare characters that can think about tectonic forces, other universes, bringing art into the desert, but also think about the practical ways and the physics that is needed in order to make sculpture happen in those places. And the way he was working with the forces of nature is truly, truly unique, and it speaks a lot to many of the things that happened here when you think about land art, when you think about abstraction and sculpture. So there were so many interesting ways to look at his work. And I'm going to let Udi talk about how this project started. But when I came across that work, I immediately thought that American audiences need to see this and need to know that happened. So it was obvious to me that this exhibition has to happen in the West Coast specifically. And when we'll talk today and you'll see more of his works, I'm sure those connections will be made clearer to you as well. So, you know, maybe the first question here should be, how did you learn about Ezra Orion, and how did you come across his work and this project?
So, this research about Ezra Orion started from kind of a wider research. I'm working at the Center for Digital Art for, I think, 8 years now, or 7.
Really?
Yes.
I'm getting old. I never, sorry, go ahead.
And then we changed a lot our program in the last few years. We moved the entire center to another part of the city, and we are focusing more on the long-term projects. And one of them is a new kind of thing that we call an Institute for Public Presence, that's supposed to think and work around art and action in public space in Israel, but not only in Israel. So, and it's supposed to do it in different ways, like to create this archive, but also like to work with groups of artists and scholars around these issues and so on. So what we thought at the very beginning that we should do is to start with understanding what we are talking about when we're talking about art in public space. And for me, the most interesting moment in the history of art in public space in Israel is around the 70s and maybe early 80s, and basically around conceptual art in public space. And when I started looking around to understand who were the artists that worked in this kind of area, I found these different artists that did these conceptual, ephemeral actions in public space, but also one of the actions of Ezra Orion that actually, maybe up until now, it's still the most amazing part of his work for me, you know. So, but then, you know, started to understand more about him and got to I think that really start digging in even before he passed away. But I already knew that he was very ill. Like from the early 2000, he got dementia, or maybe even before. So for the past like decade and a half, he wasn't be able to communicate with other people. So actually, I never met him, you know.
Mhm.
So, but I've been in touch with his family for a long time, and went to see his studio, which is like he worked in the desert, so in Midreshet Sde Boker. So his studio is still there, like it was still, at the same state that he left it on his last day, right? You know? So with all his kind of exhibition of models of what he's planning and what he did, but
So
also,
you were invited there by his family
Yeah.
to research the
Yeah.
archive?
basically, I just
Everything
wanted to
was in a
see.
mess in the studio?
Yeah. They started to collect all the materials together because decay started to get into it, and the termites were there to eat all the papers. So it was kind of a mess, but still it was amazing to see it, just to see like the place he worked in, and the kind of scale of his thought, you know. Just to look through some of his like letters, writing to presidents and prime ministers in Israel, but not only.
And some of those are actually shown
Yeah.
upstairs. We have the original.
And trying to get everybody engaging in his work, but also like thinking about a scale that no contemporary artist, as I see, almost no contemporary artist think in that kind of scale.
So let's talk about that scale. What does that mean?
So maybe we'll show some
Maybe
images.
we'll
Okay?
show something.
Some of it you'll see, most of it you'll see probably upstairs, but also to give you like a brief about the way he worked. So
Can you see okay the images?
Mhm.
Is this okay?
maybe I'll move to this place. So here you can see like two of his kind of monuments in Israel. This is in Yerucham and this is in Jerusalem. So there are about, I don't know, 15 these kind of sculptures in Israel, different places.
So
This is in Yerucham.
We could also know that Yerucham is a very peripheral town.
Yeah.
It's very small, and it's southern Israel, and Jerusalem, of course, is a large metropolitan. So very
Mhm.
two different urban settings, but he brings that scale into those environments.
Of course, and still up to date, this is like the highest thing in Yerucham for sure. It's 30 meters high, which is somewhat big.
90.
90 something.
I will translate.
Yeah, sorry. So these kind of objects from concrete, most of them, are all around. Some people many people know them, but don't know that it's done by Ezra Orion. So this is kind of thing that you meet in the public space in Israel.
So it's interesting that you meet the works in the public space, but you don't necessarily know who's the
Mhm.
artist behind them. And Orion has been working at a great distance from the Israeli mainstream art world.
Mhm.
Udi mentioned that his studio is based in Midreshet Sde Boker. That means he was working in the desert, away from the centers of art in
Mhm.
Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, or even Haifa in northern Israel. So his politics as an artist, or his thinking about his position within the art world as an artist, didn't go through the mainstream. He did his own thing at a distance, and maybe that's part of the reason why it was so crystallized
Mhm.
and so unique, because he wasn't working in relation to any gallery concerns or
course.
any, public engagement concerns. He was just at the studio
Mhm.
working and teaching.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, he started to do art in the 50s, early 50s. He was learning in Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem. And then in 65, he went to learn in St. Martin's in London. And but up until then, he created like these small-scale sculptures, mostly from metal or I don't know, sometimes wood, and some drawings. I don't know. But then after he got back, actually while he was still there, in '65, he started to create these kind of large sketches that you'll be able to see upstairs, some of them, of spaces. Okay, so it's architectural spaces. And he's doing it after he's visiting, in his travel throughout Europe, these kind of churches. But then he draws their inner sense, the way that they work. So you see in many of them, this kind of light source, so basically the window, one big window. You see like scale that is not real in any way. So you know this is like a person should be like this in this scale, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And you see this angle is also very important, and we'll see it again. So this is one. This is like another example of these kind of designs. Okay, so they are not real churches, but these are taken from real one that he's visiting. And then when he gets back, he completely neglects the gallery space. So he decides that he won't do it anymore at all. And he starts to design this kind of sculptures for public spaces, like very large scale, that won't be bordered by anything else. So this is a model of kind of sculpture film. So again, you see here the size of the people. So this is something that he designed for the desert. And then when he works in this kind of area, he also started to do like this basic land art, So he's working in the desert, and he's thinking a lot about what he calls tectonic sculpture, which is kind of sculpture that relate to the way that the earth moves, the different parts of earth moves, and then actually it's an event for the audience to get engaged with this. So now you see like this line of 800 meters of stones that he created in the desert, but just to make you walk along this line of stone towards the highest peak in the area, which is
about a mile.
Yeah. This is another kind of works that he did. So you see already the scale, to move this stone, what you need to move this stone together, what kind of production you need. And he's doing it with friends,
What happened to the sculpture field?
He didn't do it, basically. Some of it, at least one or two part of it were done. As one pieces, like the one in Ramat Aviv that you see upstairs, and also in the presentation of Dan, is should have been part of the field, but he didn't create it. He neglected it. At some point, of course, it's very complicated.
So it became like a conceptual model for the way he would like to do work, but it didn't necessarily materialize.
Yeah, so basically he created this model, but also models for different kind of elements in this. And he works a lot with this kind of element, and you see this, the triangle there, that become like very important also in the sense of this angle that this person should look through. Again, this kind of churches that is, or cathedral that he looks through, this angle towards the sky, which we'll come back to maybe in a minute. So these kind of things, but also this. This one is in Nepal. He's doing it. He's creating it like he's gone there 4 times with a group of people, just to create this. You can see it very good here, but this line of stone with stairs. So it's a one-person piece. To stand in front of the Himalayas. So again, he called it lunch sites. Lunch sites for basically for the conscious.
For consciousness.
Yeah, for consciousness. So basically, the person should see himself in front of the everlasting the greatness of the universe and so on. So
think about that in relation to Romanticist painting, like 18th century search for the sublime. There's something very similar, in a weird way, because it's not supposed to be that similar, the way that he engages with his artistic practice, but that search of the sublime and the forces of nature,
of course,
comes into play.
And again, this angle is very important. It's here also. Okay, so now these are like the most interesting and amazing works that he did. This one didn't happen, but almost. So he was in talks for 10 years, I think, with NASA about creating this sculpture
Installation.
on the surface of Mars, basically. So it's a land art on the surface of Mars. Yeah, so
Because why not? I mean,
Yeah.
why not?
So basically, what he wanted to do is they have all these rovers that land there. Like I think now the 5th or 6th already is there, and after they're finishing their work there, they just stay there. Okay. So basically, he suggests something very simple. After the mission, just let me use this vehicle over there to set this line of stone in the same way that we saw before. But he wanted to do it like in the biggest valley on the surface of Mars, which you can see here, you know, this one. And basically it's it's the size of the US, you know, from side to side. So it's very big area, and he wants to do it in different places. So it's in Hebrew here. Yeah? So these are the places that he wants to do it. And the most surprising thing is that they really talk with him about it. So they're thinking about it and trying to see if it's possible. And then sending him this small book of different vehicles that they're thinking about the future for these kinds of missions. So it's very interesting to see how he is preparing for these kind of projects and getting like the Prime Minister engaged and the UN engaged and so on. So this one is interesting, but this one maybe is the most important one because this one really happened. Okay. So basically, he did it 3 times. This is the most complex one. You see the Earth, and you see
planet Earth and laser beams
yeah.
that go up to the heavens.
So these are laser beams that were shot in '92. This is the most complex. The complex one is from '92. They are shot all in the same time, parallel to each other and vertical to the Milky Way. And
I'm sorry, could you say that last part a little again? I didn't hear you. I was interested.
They were shot. They are laser beams. They're shot parallel to each other. Yeah, all in the same time. Parallel.
Parallel to each
Thank
other
you.
and to the Milky Way.
Okay.
And vertical to the Milky Way.
Vertical. to the
Vertical,
Milky Way.
okay.
So basically, it's 1 billion kilometers high of light, which is 55 minutes and 33 seconds. Okay, and it is done from machines that are connected to NASA. This kind of network that is connected to NASA. This kind of machine that can do it in Israel, in Egypt, in Russia, in Europe, in different places. So all in the same time. So what happens is you have this kind of monolith of light. It goes like you stop sending the laser, then you have this kind of thing that fly in space forever. Okay, so this is amazing. Now it's about 26 light years from us. Yeah, and if you think about it, of course you can never see it. Yeah, it's a conceptual work. You could saw it in the place of the
launch, the actual launch
yeah.
site.
Only one beam, yeah, of course. But when you think about it, it's the work of art that is farthest away from human race, and it will always be like that because nothing can that we know of can go, you know, can catch it because it's light, you know. So for me, this is mind blowing. Yeah. I think that, for example,
So-
yeah, just to get you
Yeah,
up to
that was a
date
good
about who this,
example to
person
think
is.
about one of the main questions that we were thinking about, which is why do we even think it is important to talk about Orion today, both in the context of Israeli art and also in the context of international art. Can you say something about that, about why is it still important to talk about this in Israel? And also, why is it important to talk about this here?
So for Israel, first of all, it's interesting to see that in his time when he did it, you know, artists knew about him. Okay, so it's not like an outsider. It's not an outsider art. He went to the right schools and he did like real art. So he wasn't dismissed in that way. But they didn't have any interest to have a conversation with him because he kind of did something that they didn't understand, or I don't know. So I don't know, only one or two artists I know that really worked with him. But then also he didn't have any interest to talk with these kind of painters. I don't know. No, it wasn't interesting for him also to get engaged with the art scene, let's say. So in a way, this is, and again he worked in the desert, so this is also why he wasn't really thought of it, you know. But today, you know, for many contemporary artists, to meet him for the first time is very interesting, and I think that in many ways is more relevant today for contemporary Israeli artists, not in the scale maybe, or not specifically the scale. This is not the thing, but in the way of thinking about what you're doing and what's the dimension of what you're doing. And actually, there's one very interesting paragraph in one of his writing that is talking about what sculptures should do today.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is to work in the greater scale as he is doing, but the other one is to work in the microscopic scale.
Mm.
So anyway, the scale for sculpture is to do something that is completely different from what we see as sculpture today. So this is very interesting, and this is why I think is still relevant and interesting today.
Do you think the same way about the global context of his work?
Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, in many ways, for land art, I think it's important to understand him in the context of history, like to understand
Mm-hmm.
it's different. But also, you know, for this we need to open a wider land, because also to understand the way that land art in Israel worked around the same time is completely different than what happened here, because most of it is like completely different scale, but also like the sense of what is it to do land art in Israel and the conflict with Palestinians. It's already super complicated and super interesting in
Yeah.
a completely different way.
And it's loaded in a very separate way from what happens here
Yeah.
with land art at the
Yeah.
time, which had its own political
Mhm.
conflicts and wars to engage with,
Mhm.
but that kind of played out in a different way in Israel.
But also when I'm thinking about his more conceptual and works in outer space, it is very relevant to things that people to do, like Trevor Palin today.
Trevor Paglin, yeah.
Yeah. So like artists that think that they're doing very new things, but actually some of it is very, you know, done
Rooted
not
in
only by
artistry,
him.
yeah.
There are a few artists that worked in this area, very few.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's very interesting to see the relations between these two areas.
I think that for me, part of the reason why, first of all, I agree with everything you say, and I can definitely see how that context plays out in his work. I think one of the concepts that I was fascinated to learn about while working with you on this exhibition was the notion that he talks about as geo-identity,
Mm-hmm.
which I think, you know, when we're talking about land art, when we're talking about overcoming the limitations of borders and lands, it's interesting to think about the way he understood himself as a Zionist man, proudly living in the desert, and in a sense working the land in order to examine it, not necessarily to conquer it or anything like that. I don't think he used those terms, but he understood his own identity as an artist and as a person through his engagement with the land, with that specific land, with the desert of Israel. And I think that notion is super interesting. It's so relevant to the way contemporary artists still struggle with their own identity, their unique identity and their identity within the art world. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this, about that notion of geo-identity and the way that plays out in his work.
It's interesting to think about it, because also like he think about himself first and foremost as a universalist, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is sometimes it's his problem,
Yeah.
You know, because he many times when he is working, he doesn't think about the context, the concrete context at all. So he thinks like the thing on his own work as the everlasting and something that is always there. But he's also like his thought is very religious. Yeah.
Thinks in religious terms.
In religious terms, what is completely anti-religious in many ways. Like
Yeah.
he completely puts it on the table. You know. He's like a scientist, you know, in the way that he talks. A scientist from the 80s. In the way that he talks about life and what is to be human. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something that is not really working great together
Yeah.
in that way. You know?
So a lot of contrast in the way
Yeah.
that he understands himself.
Yeah, and subconscious that
Yeah.
you know that we don't really see, but we must see today. You know?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. We looked at several photographs from the archive. A lot of them are shown upstairs, and we were looking at one of my favorite images: a group of people carrying boulders, just like ginormous boulders. And we started thinking about the labor aspect of the work that is also not discussed by Orion. He doesn't. It feels that in some ways he doesn't even look at the labor that is involved with literally carrying out his projects, but really looks up to the heavens and the way the work can function. That's interesting. That's also something that he doesn't really address.
That's true, but it's also connected with that he was also an army man. You know,
He was, yeah. He was a leader
yeah.
in many ways. He thought of himself as a leader in many ways.
It's not completely accurate because he's also doing it on his own, so he also carries these stones with these people. But again, he expects from them to be his soldiers.
So he brings in that ethos into the work.
Completely.
It's interesting. So I have one more question for you. What can we take from this, looking not only into the present but also into the future? First of all, what's going to happen to his archive and his studio? Because his family is doing a lot of interesting things right now. What are you doing with those materials? And then in a broader sense, what does this mean to the continuation of his legacy?
Yes. So for his archive, we just in the center received all these estates, and we're going to digitalize it. It's about 10,000 different documents. It's amazing. You know, it's much more than you will be able to see here, like with these different sketches, but also like designs, architectural designs for these kind of objects, and the one that are done and the one that aren't done. So we're going to digitalize it, and basically we're going to put it all on our site, and also on our university site, so it will be open for researchers, and this is something that we hope people will try to do something with it. But I think that for me, it is very important to try to bring back some of his spirit of you know, like his in a way he's fearless in what he's doing. He cares about nothing. He just need to do this, and it must be like this greater scale, and you know. So I think that not many artists think in this kind of you know, artists today are more cynical in a way, and then not all of them of course, but many. And then they don't think in this kind of scale, and I think it's pity. You know, sometimes it's also, you know, a bit complex to do these kind of projects, and you know they have these all you know the things that happen, you know, to the people they work on it, you know, and the way that he treated people. Of course, we need to consider this also, but again, we need to think about art, you know, it should be like ambitious, yeah.
Ambitious in scale and expectations.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be in scale, maybe. It's not this. it's the way that they think about itself. You know, what I as an artist should do, and what can I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a good example.
Great. Wonderful. Let me open the floor now and see if you have any questions. Yes.
So, for an artist who worked sort of outside of the mainstream, how the extent to which his art entered into the public space, I'm just wondering if you could talk about how it came to exist outside the desert and in places like Jerusalem, and what that meant for him as an artist and the public's relationship to him.
So he's out of the art scene, but he's completely not out of the contact with, you know, with institutions or with the Jerusalem Museum. He also done things, you know, we don't have to put him that far away. But then, because of this ambitious, he writes like thousands of letters just to try to get things done, and many times he succeeds. So, and people appreciate him, you know, it's like also some very important artists today in Israel. So it's possible, and he has, again, this part of his army life is also very helpful in a way, because he gets to, you know, some of the project like in the desert, he's just calling his friends from the army to help him, you know, to move things around. But also some other times, just connections. It's all about this.
And in a broader sense, you know, to think about the second part of your question, I think that when you look at a series of photographs of his sculptures in Israel's public spaces and their scale, it almost feels like those urban spaces became another site for experimentation, of playing out things that started happening in the desert, and allow people to come closer to them and engage with them in a very different way. Sometimes they look like aliens in the public space. You know, those concrete, geometric shapes surrounded by beautiful lawns, and sometimes they look like they were just erected from the grounds. So it's interesting to see how those different relationships play out in the public space.
Oh yeah, I had a question for Udi. You mentioned Trevor Paglen or Pan, I'm not sure how to say his last
Yeah.
name. And you said there are not that many artists who work in this register. I wondered, first of all, how Trevor's work is in that register, and what register you were talking about, and
You
are
know
there
his
other
work?
projects? What's that?
You know his work?
Yeah, I do.
So in the last few years, he did some projects in outer space. You know.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not the part about photography that you must know.
Yeah.
He sent like this disc that will last, I don't know, after the Earth will no longer exist, to outer space. And now we did just something new that I'm not really sure what it is actually.
He's,
But
You know, the one with the
I think he's launching into space like a satellite
Ah,
will
right.
unfold, and it'll be a big reflective,
but it's
a
many
reflective
satellites, no?
sphere or
Something
something
like that.
that'll be visible from the Earth at
Yeah,
night.
yeah. So this kind of thinking about the way to work out of this Earth, I think.
out
it's
of this
interesting.
world.
Yeah.
So is there a history to that register, that kind of, I don't know, whatever it is, cosmic or...
There are a few, and actually there are a few very interesting, I can't show it now, but artwork that are really connected with the program of NASA. So one of them is like the first museum on the moon, which is kind of a plaque this size, with 6 works. One is of Andy Warhol, and I don't know the other.
It's like a
the
capsule
ones.
project that they send up.
But it's not a capsule, it's
Yeah,
like
but it's
fake.
like-
It's on it, and also there's a monument on the surface of the moon, which is kind of a small sculpture of an astronaut, like metal sculpture.
And that,
So-
I think that also connects back to Orion because of the institutional collaboration. That it's something that happens from within the way the institution works. They supported artistic projects. They were able to make happen. They have artists in residence.
And there are the other artists that, many times it's about the institute. Of course, maybe soon it will change, with the, how it's called, the X, the Space X. No?
Yeah, no, it won't. No.
No, so it will be with companies, with
Corporations, you
with
mean
corporations,
non-governmental
yeah,
institutions?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, for sure.
But unfortunately now it must be with NASA, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Or with, actually he also tried to do it with the
JPL.
Russian NASA, I don't know what it's called.
Mm.
But there are some letters in this direction, and then, of course, nothing happened. So,
That we know.
yeah, of course.
Yes.
As you were talking, I was thinking the sculptures and the large-scale things that you did in the desert, like the walking up. For me, it connects somewhat to this space kind of thing. We talk about these different things that may have been made by extraterrestrial, some things in the desert, that there was something similar. So I was thinking that maybe that connects to his idea of putting this thing on Mars and these, space beams and all of those.
Actually, this is very interesting because I was trying to, when I look through his materials, to find out if he believes in aliens or whatever, and it's completely out of the question. It's not the question anyway. If aliens we see it, I don't know. It's not of interest to him. For him, the thing is for human to understand that there is something like that on the surface of Mars, or even if at some place he writes about the possibility to broadcast it. So to see it here. But and of course the laser, it's not about communicating with other aliens. So again, it's connected to the way that he thinks about humanity and very scientific kind of thing. If we don't know about aliens, then we want to make art for them. Something like that. Yeah.
Are these installations in the desert still there?
Yeah. Some of them, like the line of stone, some of the stones are off, like floods, and so, but it's still there, yeah, for sure. And also in the Himalaya, he fixed it, he went there for 4 times because he had to fix it sometime. But I know I have these photos from this group that has been there like 2 years ago, yeah, so it's still there. So it holds, yeah. And some of them are like really great stones that will stay there forever, basically.
So you'd mentioned Israeli land art and how that was a little bit different from the U.S. version. I just don't know that much about Israeli art history, so I was curious if you could say a little bit about what land art in Israel was like, how kind of diverged from what was going on in the U.S., and also what Orion's relationship to that was.
So Orion is maybe the most relative to what's happening here. But most of the other works, like Pinchas Cohen Gan, is very ephemeral works.
Sometimes performance-based.
Yeah. So Pinchas is like digging a hole and like laying with carrots, or very political works like exchange of land between a Palestinian village and a Jewish village.
So I want to say something about that. So if you think about land art that happened here, conceptual art that was very politically involved that happened here, the main conflict that they were thinking about was happening elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Land artists in Israel were very close to where the conflict was happening, and sometimes they were working in kibbutzim, and they all fought for their country, and they all took a very active part in the way that conflict unfolded. So their work was closer to the ground zero in that sense, and they understood that closeness, and they worked with it, and they tried to break boundaries within that, boundaries of working with kibbutzim in a very interesting way that never happened before. Working with Palestinian villages, thinking about those themes in mainstream art in a way that never happened before, and I think is very different than what happens here. So the interests are the same,
But
but the
also,
way it plays out, the way it unfolded, that was different.
But also about Orion, it's very interesting to think about the way that he is living in the desert. So he is living in the place of the land art, not like
Yeah.
many American artists that go to the desert because they want to understand this kind of contrast, So I think it's also very interesting to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, that he chose to live there, as opposed to many other land art Israeli
Yeah.
artists.
Yeah.
I mean, you said that he was probably the closest to American land artists because is his work, because of his sort of, he feels somehow more connected to the sort of institutional narrative than some of these artists who are working much more closely with the conflict. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah.
You had mentioned that to execute the laser project, that it required a cooperation from many nations that had these significant devices and so on. So was that political aspect of it part of what he was important to him, or was that secondary to just the?
It was secondary.
Secondary.
Basically, he knew about this kind of anniversary for this network, and he just grabbed on it, But other times,
Was it the International Year of Space?
something, I don't
1992.
remember.
But as an Israeli artist, then it was somewhat easy because of that for him to get the agreement of these sometimes adversarial,
I think it's more connected to the way that it is in the field of science,
Yeah.
and in the science I think that, that like the political aspect is not that like straight on the table. I know this is also true today, like in the academia where you find the BDS in like humanities or arts, but in the science, most of places don't think about it at all.
Was it photographed at all from satellites? Or?
No, I think that it can be photographed basically because the light is
Too intense.
Also,
so small.
he was very persistent. He was very persistent in getting support from the right people in the government. Shimon Peres was a great supporter of his work, and he gave him recommendation letters that opened up doors for him with, representatives of other governments. He tried to get support from Bill Clinton. So he was very, he just saw what he wants to do. That's the ambitiousness that he was talking about earlier. He saw what he wants to do, and he just went to make it happen.
Well, and that's kind of what my point was
Yeah.
Was that a desire of his to try
Yeah.
to create some unity between all these?
But it's
People
not about
that-
unity.
No, it's not about unity.
But-
It's about making the work happen.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But he was also like every person that knows him talks about what kind of amazing charisma he had. He's a huge person in size, very very tall, and you see the like short video. It's in Hebrew, but still, I urge you to listen like just for a few minutes to just get a feeling of who he is, and of course this is a very important parameter.
Yeah. The
Why
way
he's
he was able to
successful.
get people
Yeah.
on his side. Yeah. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
Why this question? Then one more.
No, it's like almost time. People need to get more something to drink. Just one more question. Don't you want more? Do you want to
No.
say
I'll ask one more question.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask later.
Yeah.
I guess, I was thinking about this register, and I think to think about it as just, working with NASA or space agencies, that's not exactly what I think the spirit of it is.
Of course.
It seems like the museum on the surface of the moon is in some ways antithetical to it because it's sort of slightly ironic, it's humorous, and this thing, the laser beams into space that are 1 billion kilometers high has more. I'm trying to think of other projects that had that have like a time scale that goes beyond the possibility of human life, or that are on some physical scale, or that are somehow, yeah, on a kind of cosmic scale. And I wonder why, to me, there's something, and you said you would like to bring back some of this kind of spirit. You think that that scale of ambition, not necessarily in terms of size, but I don't know any other word besides the spirit of these kinds of projects. Why do you think that seems somehow anachronistic to me?
Seems so.
It seems somehow like out of time, or I mean, why do you think that needs to be brought back, or why is it not currently present?
First of all, I'm envy of the
Yeah.
people that worked. With
Me too,
artists,
but when you said artists today are more cynical,
Yeah.
I'm trying to grasp at a question here. When I think of this work, it seems somehow out of time to me. It seems representative of a previous time, something about the early 20th century avant-garde or 20th century modernism that's somehow not accessible. I don't know if it's just because artists are more cynical, or I don't think that's necessarily it. Somehow that earnestness of spirit seems somehow inaccessible. But I wonder if you have any insight as to why.
I don't know why, but I feel that it's not about like it's a modernistic kind of thing that we need to. We are in a different place now. I think it's another problem that I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's the reason. And also like about the museum on the surface of Mars. I think it's completely non-cynical. It's a real project, you know. It's a museum on the surface of the moon. We are seeing it maybe today as a cynical project, but for them it was I don't know what year it is, like maybe the 80s or something like that. I don't know. I feel that you know. Also, when I talk with artists today about this kind of work, I feel that they are also envy in this kind of spirit, and maybe this is something, you know, that we need today, like to people sometime, you know, not every time, not in all their work, but to think about like to what it means to be an artist is also like to be to do things that never done before. Basically, this is it, you know, to do things that never done before. For me, this is why it's this is kind of spirit that I want to find in arts. Not about a scale.
I think also maybe because it is so not connected to the market. Since being an artist today has so much to do with the market and the value, the commercial value of the artwork. This has nothing to do with the art market. So I think that maybe Udi also was thinking about, that is a spirit that maybe we want to bring back, a conceptual philosophical artwork that, you know, that is actually priceless.
Unquantifiable. Thank you so much, Udi.
There was one more question.
Oh, wait, stop. Couldn't see that.
Well, in my opinion, it raised the questions of who's the audience. Because as a human being, we can imagine how it's going to feel as a human being when we are looking now at the picture, so you're like an ant. But to grasp the whole idea, the angle of the sun, the shade of the sun, you cannot accept it as a human being.
Yeah.
The same as all the pictures that we show from space. So
What,
is
for
the
this? Why
when
not?
you're walking there, you cannot grasp everything.
But it's not the program is not to grasp everything. It's to have these kind of special moments.
Right.
That you go into this space and then the lights washes it in this kind of manner.
So again, I'm coming to the first statement. Who is the audience of all his work with the grandiosity scale? So probably the high spirit and who knows? Because as a human being, it's not something that we present in a gallery or in part of the area will be done in Yeruham. So
No, but people, even more, So people see it every day
Yeah.
when they are living with it, you know? Especially in places like Yerucham. Think about the one thing that you see every day. Whenever you go to the store, to school, whatever, this is there. It's kind of, I don't know, totally in the middle of the
Yeah, that
the
actually
space.
gives you the opportunity to have a more meaningful relationship with the work because you experience it differently every day.
Mhm.
So that's one very particular aspect of the public presence of these works. But the works in space, the laser beams, the participatory aspect of them for human beings could have only happened during the actual launch, and that means to only be in the presence of one singular laser beam.
No, but I think that
And
we are
that's-
participating now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is conceptual.
Yeah, but that's
talk about
conceptual
conceptual art.
Yeah.
We are experiencing it now because we understand something now about the thing that is happening there now. This thing that is going on for 26 light years from us is still going on outside of the solar system by now. So all this question about the also like the possibility of this kind of thing. So I think that and again about our size in this kind of game. So all these questions, all this kind of feeling about this is happening now for us as an audience, with all its problematicality.
Problematic aspects.
Problematic aspects of this kind of conceptual art. That you don't really need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Udi, for being with us.